My bad, stream. Just making my bed so it doesn't look like I'm a fucking loser. You know, just hiding the truth. Base is good. Bro says he's in Blinker City in the chat. Said I am. Okay. Well, 4 days upkeep. Doors are closed. I'm going to do politics first and then games after. So, a lot of people have been talking to me about the war today, and I'm not impressed with anybody. I watched half of this on my way home. I think we'll start with that because Tucker's been on the money the past week, just exposing Israel and telling everybody why we are fighting this war, you know, for Israel. I'm going to switch it. Just need to make sure you guys can hear it.
Food, water, life.
Killed a priest last night. Really?
Yeah, it's working. I'll turn it up a little bit. I don't want it to be too loud.
What is that? Is that true? You read that there are power outages in Bangladesh. Bangladesh?
And I need to fix my fucking audio.
Asia
I
is
never
suffering.
did
The
that.
world is suffering due to the choke point of Hormuz, the Straits of Hormuz, that are closed or semi-closed by Iran and have been since this began. And that's causing massive downstream effects in markets, in manufacturing, in the global economy. How long is that going to last? What's the end game there? And then, of course, the war itself, which is playing out in Iran and Israel and throughout the Arab world, really, primarily in the Gulf states, but not just the Gulf states. What's the damage?
Hello.
Well, the truth is, in a lot of cases, we don't really know, because the censorship of this war on social media, and of course, the big mainstream outlets are censored, always have been. But the promise of social media was you could get unmitigated information, you could get videos live from the scene, and now suddenly you can't. That lasted about 24 hours before the clampdown. And in part, that was by governments of the Gulf states. They don't want physical destruction of their countries broadcast to the world. The government of Israel has clamped down completely. They don't want videos of Tel Aviv or Haifa burning. You can, in fact, in some of these countries, go to jail for posting that stuff online. But it's not just the governments of those countries that are imposing censorship. It's the social media companies here that are imposing censorship on the American people who are paying for all of this. So they can't know. And then there does seem to be a kind of censorship practiced by the U.S. government around casualties and deaths. How many people have died so far in this conflict? How many have been injured?
I heard
Where
6 or 7
and under
died.
what circumstances? Now, these are sensitive.
It's not time for jokes, my bad. But seriously, I heard 6 or 7 soldiers died so far.
Questions in any conflict. And of course, you don't in any way want to degrade the effectiveness of the U.S. military. You don't want to dispirit the troops whom we are rooting for sincerely, always and everywhere, rooting for
We're not gonna watch the whole
Americans
thing. We're gonna bounce around.
in whatever theater, in whatever war.
YouTube
It wasn't
keeps
of their
fucking
choosing.
striking me.
In some cases, they are
Every
just
time I try to watch another
the people who
person's
suffer
video,
first and
so
most due to the decisions of politicians. So we're always on their side, and you don't want to make
we
things
know
worse
what
for them. On the
country
other
runs
hand,
that domicile.
Americans do have, on a fundamental level, a right to know the effects of this war on their countrymen. If Americans are killed, we have a right to know that. And yet there's some indication that we really don't. So as you try to figure out what's going on, keep in mind you can't really get the full picture because the clampdown on information. And so in the conversation that we're about to have, we're going to go through what we think we know. In some cases, we might be wrong. Just want to be honest about that up front. Very hard to know what the truth is at this stage, really at any stage, but particularly in the face of this kind of censorship. But we're going to try to be as honest as we possibly can and provide as much information as we possibly can, given the limitations, because this war matters, maybe more than most wars. This war hasn't been settled. Clearly, there are parties who would like to settle it, but no one person is in charge of whether it gets settled. Israel is a partner in this war, probably the first war the United States has ever fought with a true partner with decision-making authority. It's very different from going into Afghanistan with a NATO coalition.
I think we're the partner. Now, we might have, taken the lead with them and attacked first. Right? Iran didn't do shit to us, or Israel. I mean, Iran kind of hit them with a couple missiles last time they were fucking around, and they found out, and then they stopped. But, I just don't, he says, oh, Israel's a partner in the war. I don't think if Israel was in the picture, we would be even doing this.
Norway didn't have veto power over anything, but Israel does. And so it's complex, very complex, and the Iranians have their own, of course, completely different agenda. So it may not be settled anytime soon. We're praying that it is. But more fundamentally, this is a different kind of war.
Let's take a dab real
So
quick.
over the course of our lifetimes, most wars the United States has fought, all of them really on some level wars of choice. The U.S. hasn't been invaded really since 1812. So all of these are wars that the U.S. government decided to become involved in or start. And pretty much all of them were initiated on the same pretext, which is we are preserving the order of the world, the international order, the rules-based order, whatever you want to call it. We're preserving the way things are. And this country we're going to war with violated the rules. Therefore, we're going to war to restore the rules. That is not what we're watching now. There's some evidence that the president of the United States, Donald Trump, thought that's what this was about. Iran wants to get nukes. They can't have nukes. We can't have more nuclear proliferation. You can't have rogue states with nuclear weapons. Weapons of mass destruction are bad. Got it. We've heard that before. Of course, the effect of this will be to radically accelerate proliferation around the world, because what's the lesson of what we're doing right now? You better have nukes or else you're going to get regime change. No one's trying to regime change North Korea because they have nukes. So the incentive for every small but reasonably wealthy country, as of right now, is get nukes as quickly as you can, because you're going to get regime changed if you don't, potentially. And if you're a bystander to a war and happen to get caught up in it, like the Gulf states are right now, no one is going to protect you. These security guarantees, formal and informal, are not real. Downtown Dubai can still get destroyed and your economy destroyed for a generation because
Holy shit.
who's going to stop it? You're on your own. So countries that feel they're sincerely on their own have every incentive to have the most effective deterrence possible, and that would, at this point, be nuclear weapons. So you're going to see a lot more nuclear-armed states in the next few years, without question. So if the point of this was to preserve the status...
Yeah, I just heard Poland was, I guess Poland is considering developing nukes now, and France is saying that they're going to make more nukes than they already had. I didn't even know France had nukes. I didn't know they were like that. But, yeah, we're scaring the shit out of the whole fucking world to the point where multiple countries are deciding, oh, we need a nuclear program because you guys are fucking crazy.
Status quo on nukes, it had the opposite effect. But the point of this was not to preserve the
Can
status
you guys
quo
hear me well?
at all. It was to overturn the status quo, to usher in a new age. That's the point of this war. This is a pivot in history, and a lot of the people supporting it know that. Now, they're really in two groups. One are people motivated by religious impulse. That would include some Israelis, some religious Jews, not all, but some. And that would include some Christians, Christian Zionists. And both groups believe that they're helping to accelerate the end of history. Armageddon, the end of time, the return of the Messiah, however you want to describe it. But both groups believe that history is linear. It began in one place and arrives at another with the return of God to earth. And then history ends, and we are redeemed or damned, depending. So that's the basic idea. And both of these groups seem under the impression that they can force God's hand, that they can bring this about through an act of will or violence, which is to say both groups believe on some level that they are God, which they are not. They're not in charge of history. You can't force God's hand. He's in charge. You are not. But both groups have lost sight of that. So that's their motive. And then there are secular boosters of the war, promoters of the war, planners of the war. And their vision, while not strictly speaking religious, is not really so different. They would like to usher in rule by technology, whether that's mass surveillance, whether it's transhumanism, the merging of man and machine, but the rule of the earth by technology. And there are a lot of people who want this, and a lot of people who think it's inevitable.
Vacuum in my room.
And this is the moment where that age of history begins.
Hello, Twitch
with this
viewers.
War. So again, this is not a war that is confined to the region. This is not a war between the United States and Israel and Iran. This is not a war designed to prevent a rogue state from getting nukes. It was never that. This is a war designed to usher in a new age of man, a new period in history, a new world. And so wars like that are fundamentally theological in nature. That's theology, whether it's secular or religious, it's still theology. These are articles of faith. This is an eschatology. And wars like that aren't resolved quickly because we're talking not just about disarming a madman. We're talking about changing the nature of life on this planet forever. So big stakes in the minds of the people pushing this, and that means this is going to go on for a while, declared or not. And as it does, how do we respond? Well, we pray, number one. The most effective thing you can do is to say prayers for peace. Number one most effective thing you can do. But two, keep an eye on the effect of this war on us here in the United States. We're prosecuting this war. We're the main combatant here. We're spending the most money, dropping the most bombs. And how do we do that? So the key, really, whether you think this is insane, as a lot of people do, probably the majority of the country believes that, or you think it's necessary, some people do believe that, Fox News viewers believe that, Democratic leaders believe that in the House and Senate. But no matter what side you're on, the United States needs to behave with honor. Now, why is that? Because that's the whole point of being the United States. You can't have wars in a democratic republic or in a country where the people supposedly rule, where their consent is necessary, whether it is or not. That's what we tell ourselves. You can't have wars unless you believe that you are, on the deepest level, better than the people you're fighting. We're not savages. They are. Therefore, we get to kill them. And we've always told ourselves that, and in some cases it has been absolutely true. Whether we can kill them or not is another question. It's a moral question, but as a sort of matter of civic engagement, the population has to believe they're better than the people they're fighting, or else you can't have the war. And you're really sort of flirting with revolution at that point, and we don't want that. So in order to believe you're better than your opponent, you have to be. You have to behave with honor.
Yeah.
And so, for example, if innocents are killed, girls at a school, to name a current example, you have to believe that it was accidental, and you have to say out loud that was wrong. And in this specific case, the bombing of a girls' school next to an Iranian naval base that was apparently the school of choice for officers at the naval base. These were the children, the daughters of the people we're fighting. You have to believe that was accidental. Despite the fact it was hit twice, 40 minutes apart, looks very much like a double tap, which is to say a bombing and then an attack on the people coming to rescue the injured. That's what it looks like. But as an American...
Yeah, so... Oh, man, I hate this fucking shit. So, our tax dollars, right? Let's say a Tama... Let's just fucking Google it, dude. It's a popular search because people are on the same shit I'm on. A single Tomahawk missile costs $1.4 to $2.2 million, right? So we hit this school we hit an Iranian girls' elementary school. We hit it 2 times. So if we're going on the high end, $4.4 million went to killing little girls. $4.4 million. And you don't think they'd... And right, double tapped. There, you could just rule it out. They knew what they were fucking doing, right? Whoever did it. Maybe somebody stole a U.S. Tomahawk missile. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. But whoever did this knew exactly what the fuck they were doing, because they double tapped, killing the first responders that show up to dig the kids out of the rubble. Not only did they know what they were doing, they spent our money on that shit. That's the money I work for. That's money everybody here works for. And it's going to that.
And you have to believe this was a tragic mistake. But we have to verify that. We have to know for certain that it was in order to keep our honor.
Yeah, it's an accident.
Because if you
Double
wake
tap.
up in the morning and you're living in the kind of country that thinks it's okay to kill not simply military officers, but their daughters, that country's not worth fighting for. Now, speaking for myself, I am assuming that was a tragic mistake. But it's important to get to the bottom of it. How did this happen? Were these autonomous weapons that made the decision? Was there an AI program that targeted this school that thought it was something else or thought it was within bounds and targeted it, bombed it, and then bombed it again 40 minutes later? If that's the case, no more autonomous weapons for us. Should we really be making life or death decisions with a machine with no human interaction, no human sign off on that? Of course not. That's grotesque. To hand the power of life and death over to a machine, that's just transparently insane. Of course, you would never do that if you were a civilized country. And we can't do that. Did we do that? We need to find out. And if we did, we can't do that again. And we have to apologize for it. You can't kill the children of your enemies. In fact, you can't kill innocents, period. Because we're the West, and we believe that people are responsible for the sins they commit, not for the sins their relatives committed, or their ancestors, or their future descendants, or people who look like them. We don't believe that because we believe in the individual soul. Each person individually accountable to God and to the U.S. military for the things he does right and wrong, period. Collective punishment
I can't wait till Israel faces God.
is the opposite of what we believe. That's what Israel believes. And that's why on a basic level, Israel does not have a Western outlook. Because the Israeli government believes it is okay to kill people on the basis of their bloodline. They are Amalek, as the prime minister often says, again and again and again. This is Amalek. Kill not just the perpetrator, but his wife, his children, their children, his pets. This is a theological concept that Christians and the West reject as grotesque and evil. We cannot participate in that, ever, because the moment we do, we are not better than the people we're fighting at all, and we can't have that. It's a stain on all of us. So we need to find out what happened there. And the second thing we need to do is make certain that the diplomatic efforts the United States made to get to a political agreement.
Yo, that's a whole other thing. Just Trump's out here doing this shit, but like, you know, Russia and Iran and China and Russia, China and Iran, they're all cool. So like Trump's doing the shit, right? But when they go and bomb America, how much do you want to bet that Trump, right now, he's not even in the country? I bet he's fucking hiding somewhere, bro. He's not at Mar-a-Lago right now playing fucking golf. He's probably in hiding because he's currently in war. And most likely hiding in one of the ally countries. I would say the same thing about Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel. I think he's probably not even in fucking Israel right now, because the reality of that, Iran's not hitting us right now, but Iran's raining down on fucking Israel right now and just trying to cook the fucking Iron Dome so they run out of defenses. And
Before the war were legitimate. That
it's
they
only
weren't
a
a
matter of
ruse
time before somebody fucks
designed
with us
to
because of what
distract
Trump's doing.
and trap the Iranians. Why? Because an honorable nation does not engage in that kind of deceit and trickery. An honorable nation states its objectives out loud, attempts in good faith a political nonviolent solution, and then if that fails, resorts to force. That's the American tradition. That's the Western tradition. That's not the Eastern tradition, but it's our tradition, and we have to uphold it. And as of right now, we have to believe that's what we did, and that it just didn't work, couldn't come to terms. And so President Trump was effectively forced by the Israeli government into this decision to go to war. But if it ever emerges that our diplomatic efforts
They're the size of fucking New Jersey. Force who?
with Iran,
Trump is Israel's bitch.
both in February of this year and in June of last year, were fake. And they were designed to lull the Iranians into a false sense of security so we could launch a sneak attack on them. How is that better than Pearl Harbor? How is that better than any dishonorable sneak attack in history? Of course, it's not. It's low. It's beneath the United States. It's beneath us as American citizens. And anyone who participated in that needs to be punished for it right away. And as a practical matter, it makes diplomacy of all kinds impossible. How do we settle the conflict between the United States and Russia using Ukraine, poor Ukraine, as a proxy? We fight the war, Ukrainians die. How do we settle that conflict? By the way, a lot of us wish it had been settled before launching a war on Iran, because now the Russians are, of course, targeting information to the Iranians. Why wouldn't they? We've done the same with the Ukrainians for the last 4 years. That should have been settled. But it's going to be hard to settle it now because the message to the rest of the world is American diplomacy is fake. It's not real. You send negotiators in, they distract us, and then you prepare a sneak attack on us. Now, we don't know that's what happened. There's no proof that's what happened. But we need to find out what exactly did happen, because you can't behave that way. It's a disservice to American citizens if you behave that way. And it makes our future much, much tougher. Much, much tougher.
Spring is the most refreshing time of year. Nothing compliments it better than black.
Future spiked last night. Today,
I want to actually watch like another Tucker video, just one more, just information bomb. I know this shit is kind of boring, but burn more.
so whenever something big happens, particularly something really big,
This
like a
episode's
war
a
that will
banger.
change
So we're just
world
gonna-
history, the
we're
first
gonna
four
watch
questions you
the
have to
favorite
ask
parts of
are
it,
these.
and
One, why did
watch,
this
like,
happen?
More
Two,
videos,
what was
and then
the
switch to
point
some
of it?
games.
Three, where does it go from here? And four, how do we respond? So let's assess
I pressed
the
the button.
war in Iran, now ongoing in its second day, and try to answer those four questions. First, why did this happen? Now, in this case, there's a really simple answer. This happened because Israel wanted it to happen. This is Israel's war. This is not the United States' war. This war is not being waged on behalf of American national security objectives to make the United States safer or richer. This war is not actually even about weapons of mass destruction, nukes, chem bio. No, this war is waged purely because Israel wanted it to be waged. Now, why say that out loud this early in the conflict? Isn't that dispiriting for, say, American troops fighting this war? Yes, it is. And we thought a lot about whether it was wise or decent even to say something like that out loud, and have decided that it is for the following reason. First, because the truth is always the only basis for wise decision making. When you lie to yourself or you lie to your people, you not only commit well, a kind of moral crime by lying, but you also tend to hurt yourself. Hubris is the product of lies, for example. You can get way over your skis if you're not honest with yourself and the people around you about what's happening and why it's happening. But long term, that is also true. In other words, it's important to say why this war is happening, because 50 years from now, people may not know. Your grandkids may learn that this war started because the Ayatollah showed up in Miami and started machine gunning people in a shopping mall, and so we responded. There was a kind of Iranian Pearl Harbor. You don't know what the future will believe about the present. You don't know how history will be written. And if you're skeptical of that, if you're asking yourself, well, how could historians, popular historians, how could future culture so misunderstand something so big? How could people lie about something so obvious, so giant? Well, history is your guide. A lot of the big events we think we understand, including wars from the past and not so distant past, are completely distorted in our memories. In other words, that's not actually what happened at all. And the truth is, if enough people lie about something at a high enough volume, and they do it for long enough, loudly enough, while threatening anyone who refuses to lie about it, over time, their lies become conventional wisdom. Everyone believes them. There is something about repeating a lie over and over and over again that's almost like a spell or an incantation. It's almost a form of witchcraft. It assumes reality, or a version of reality, an ersatz reality, a fake reality, but reality nevertheless. And if you're interested at all in history, going back thousands of years or even more recently, you know, at home in the country that we actually live in, it's hard to say this, but the United States didn't make the decision here. Benjamin Netanyahu did. And again, it's important to say that, not to discourage anybody or make anybody feel despondent or hopeless. There's no reason for hopelessness at this point, but in order that it doesn't happen again, tell the truth so people can learn, hopefully improve and grow. But tell the truth, no matter what. So then the question becomes, we know why it started. It started because Israel wanted it and demanded the U.S. military in order to do it. Why would Israel want this? We've already established that this may or may not be a good idea for Israel, but why would they want it? What was their thinking here? If it was really about the threat of Iran building and deploying a nuclear weapon, or a nuclear-tipped ICBM aimed at Miami and New York, as Mark Levin told his poor listeners the other day. None of that's true. But if it was really about that, how could this threat have lasted for 40 years? How could, as Benjamin Netanyahu said yesterday, how could Iran's nuclear program been on the very verge, the cusp of building and deploying a nuclear weapon for 40 years? Well, of course it wasn't. Well, we can argue about Iran's aims with nuclear weapons. They probably wanted one. Who wouldn't want one? Look at what happens to countries that don't have one. Everyone wants a nuclear weapon. But were they actually about to get one? No. So what was the point? What is the point of this from Israel's perspective? Well, the point is regional hegemony. Super simple. Israel has been around for almost 80 years. Israel has nuclear weapons. Israel's got a pretty robust tech economy. But above all, Israel has big ambitions. And by the way, it's not an attack on Israel. Which growing country doesn't have greater ambitions? And which megalomaniacal leader of said country, and there are many of those around the world, by the way, wouldn't want regional hegemony? Regional hegemony means you get to control your region. Kind of a Middle Eastern Monroe doctrine. Israel wants to be able to determine, roughly speaking, what happens in its region, and it doesn't want constraints on its own behavior. In the same way, again, trying to be as generous and universally minded as possible here in this analysis, because it's true. Who wouldn't want that? Do we want that? Of course we do. We're not, we put up with a lot from Mexico and Canada, but if they all of a sudden started constraining our actual ambitions, we'd do something about it, I think, or the old America would have, a normal country would. And Israel wants to control the Middle East. And they're the only announced nuclear power in the Middle East. Are they the only actual nuclear power in the Middle East? You could debate that. Or people can guess. But they're the only country we know for certain has a big nuclear arsenal. So they want to be unrivaled in their power in their region. Again, this is not a conspiracy theory or something weird to want. It's what every country wants, and they want it, and Bibi wants it. And he sees himself as a figure out of history, not simply as a prime minister who's, fighting to keep his job, which he also is, but as a great man, as a modern Moses or whatever, as a figure. And men like that, men of destiny, change the calculation for their nation forever. They don't take small steps, they take big steps. They think big. He thinks big, to his credit or detriment, but it's a fact. And so this war is an effort, not simply in addition to everything else. No, it is exclusively an effort on the part of Israel to achieve regional hegemony, total control. So what does that mean exactly? Well, it means you have to sweep away your enemies. And in the case of Iran was an enemy of Israel, by the way. And Iran was also funding insurgencies and militant groups in the region to kind of pick at Israel and hassle Israel, kill Israelis. That's all true. Hezbollah, Hamas, Iran funded, absolutely. Houthis, Iran funded, absolutely. But there's actually two other components, two other speed bumps on the way to regional dominance for Israel. And the first is something called the GCC. The GCC is an informal alliance, maybe a little more formal as of today, but it's these 6 Gulf monarchies. It's the energy-producing Gulf states. And those would be Bahrain, Oman, Kuwait, UAE, Qatar, and Saudi. And these are some of the biggest, most important energy producers in the world. They're all Sunni Arab states. They are all rich, and all of a sudden, they are all now internationally, or some of them are internationally influential because they are the site of global diplomacy. They are filling the void left by Switzerland, which, not to get too boring about it, but basically took sides.
Let me.
It's a safe bet that almost no one involved in the war now ongoing in Iran and the Gulf would like to see it continue much longer. If you were to poll, the Iranians or the Americans, killers itself, and publicly worship God and sacrifice on that spot, in that city, Jerusalem, on that spot. And on that spot was built a temple, the first temple. And that was destroyed by the Babylonians, famously. And then it was rebuilt and later improved by Herod. And it was, at its completion, I think, the largest building, certainly the largest religious building in the ancient world. And it was in that building that Jesus preached, in what we call the Second Temple that Jesus preached, the very center of Judaism, building without which you can't really have Torah Judaism. The religion just didn't work without it. By its own terms, in its own book, it said that. And during one of his sermons, in that sermon, Jesus, who Christians believe is God sent to earth, says, this will be torn down. Not one stone will be left standing. And it was shortly after that that he was put on trial in the middle of the night and tortured to death, crucified. As it happened, so that's the religion. Here's the history. About 35 years later, 37 years later, in that range, in 70 AD, Titus, the emperor of the Roman Empire, got into quite a conflict with the Jews of Judea and Jerusalem. And it's complex and incredibly brutal, but the bottom line was, in AD 70, the Romans besieged Jerusalem, finally broke through the walls, and tore that temple stone from stone, not a single stone left upon another. Really a kind of dedication to destruction that's hard for the modern mind to imagine. We talk about genocide this, genocide that. The Romans tried to genocide the Jews for real. and they succeeded in destroying the temple. And with it, Temple Judaism, Torah Judaism. You can't have the religion that existed before AD 70, after AD 70, because there's no temple. And so this has been an open wound for 2,000 years, and certainly understandably, people have wanted to rebuild the temple, to build what they call the third temple, to reestablish this religion at its birthplace. There are a couple problems with this. One, exactly 500 years after Titus destroyed the temple in AD 70, in AD 570, a man called Muhammad was born in Mecca and built one of the world's great religions, the world's second largest religion, as it stands today, in a very short period. His name was Muhammad. He was born in Mecca. He died in nearby Medina. But in the meantime, he built or inspired the building of, within 50 years of his death, one of the great religious monuments in the world, certainly one of the prettiest, called the Dome of the Rock. And it's in Jerusalem on Moriah, in fact, built over the foundation stone. And if you've ever been to Jerusalem, or if you've ever seen photographs of it, you will remember vividly a gold dome. It's called the Dome of the Rock. Why is it called that? Because there's a rock underneath it, the foundation stone, that is built on the site of the Second Temple. And that's in what's known as the Al-Aqsa complex. There's a mosque next door called the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And that spot is one of three holy places, apparently co-equal holy places, in Islam: Mecca, Medina, Dome of the Rock, Al-Aqsa. So that is at the very center of Judaism. I mean, physically the center of Judaism, that spot, that exact spot over the foundation stone, and Islam. And it has been occupied by a mosque. A mosque has been sitting there since the 7th century, since the late 600s. Amazing. You may be dimly aware of this. Now, why go on at length about this? Because now is the moment, right now, like this week, is the moment that some people, not a huge number, most people, Christians, Jews, Muslims, are not fully aware of all this, but some people are highly aware of it and would like to begin the process of tearing down the Dome of the Rock, tearing down Al-Aqsa Mosque, and rebuilding the Third Temple. Now, there are a lot of things to say about this, about its likelihood, the potential effects of it. But first, just a quick side note on the theology of this from a Christian point of view. Now, it was Jesus who said this temple will be torn down, shocking everyone around him. If it's in the Gospels, it's in at least a couple of the Gospels. And the people who heard it just couldn't believe it. And of course, the people running the temple, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, were gravely offended by it. Why wouldn't they be? But then it happened. Less than 40 years later, it actually happened. He was right. He called it. And so from a Christian perspective, he did that. God called for the destruction of the temple. And as Jesus says plainly in the Gospels, I'm the temple. I'm the temple now. The temple will be rebuilt after 3 days. When I'm resurrected, I am the new temple. Says that. But there has been at least one attempt in the last 2,000 years to rebuild a physical third temple. And it happened in the 4th century. And it happened, without getting too far afield, shortly after the death of Constantine. Now, Constantine was the 4th century Roman emperor who converted to Christianity and very famously turned the Roman Empire Christian, thereby spreading Christianity basically instantly across the West, where it's remained, more or less, ever since. That was in the 300s, the 4th century. Now, his nephew became emperor not long after he died, and his name was Julian, referred to very often by Christian historians as Julian the Apostate. And he was an apostate. He was the last non-Christian emperor of Rome, of the Roman Empire. And he had been born a Christian apparently, but he was a fairly enthusiastic pagan, polytheist, and very aggressively opposed to Christianity. And for that reason, Julian the Apostate decided in 363 to rebuild the Third Temple. So it has been tried. For those who are thinking, could this ever happen? Oh, it happened. They tried to rebuild. He spent a ton of money doing it in 363.
Inflation makes credit card statements particularly scary. You work 40, 50 hours a week just to buy groceries.
repeated the earth rent. By the way, just a few months later, Emperor Julian the Apostate was killed. You know what he was killed doing? Invading Iran. Literally invading Iran in 363. Yeah, he was killed doing that. So it was during his invasion of Iran that he decided to rebuild the temple. You can't make this up. And we're not making up Israel. And by the way, there was an earthquake at the same time. There are many accounts of what happened when they tried to rebuild it. And all of them describe the earth rending and flames coming out. And it all sounds kind of spooky and supernatural. Like it's just too perfect, right? Jesus tears down the temple and begins this new relationship with God directly through him. No need for a building anymore in Jerusalem, a city he went out of his way not to spend the night in, walk over to the Mount of Olives, even after the Last Supper, but whatever. And there's this one attempt by a guy who hates Christianity to rebuild the third temple. And by the way, the workmen get burned by fire from the ground at an earthquake. And you can sort of laugh at that if you're a rationalist, a materialist, a modern man, until archaeologists discovered that actually there was a big earthquake in the region, from Galilee to Jerusalem in 363. So that actually happened. In any case, why the long history lesson? Because it's not history anymore. It's happening right now. There are key players involved in this war, the one happening tonight, who believe that what we're seeing on our television screens and on Twitter will usher in a series of events that begin with the destruction of the Dome and the Rock, Aqsa Mosque, and then the rebuilding of the Third Temple, after which the world will end. God will come back. And they mean it. And by they, we mean literally some of the guys fighting.
So basically, they're doing this war to bring Jesus back. It's a religious thing.
The war. So you may have read reports today that commanders in the field of American troops, a lot of them, and who knows if this is true, but it's out there, told their troops on the eve of the outbreak of this war that we're doing this for Jesus because it is Jesus' will that we do this, and that by doing it, we will usher in a series of events that bring about the end of history, the end of time, Armageddon, the last days. It's hard to believe that's true, especially since, by the way, there are 1 million Christians in Iran. So if you were doing this for Jesus, presumably you would go out of your way not to hurt his followers in the country you're attacking. Did the U.S. government or any government make any attempt to spare the Christians? Are we making an attempt tonight? Of course we're not. And of course, when the smoke clears, ultimately we will find out, just a guess, that Christians suffered disproportionately in this, as they do all wars, from the Iraq War to the bombing of Nagasaki, the seat of the Christian church in Japan, et cetera, et cetera. Christians have a way of dying disproportionately in these wars, which tells you something about their real motive. But in any case, there was a spate of stories suggesting that U.S. commanders told their troops they were doing this for some weird anti-Christian reason posing as Christianity. But it's not just the U.S. side. Here's an IDF soldier, apparently an American by his accent, describing why he's at war. Watch this.
They call this operation the Swords of Iron. But what are we really fighting for? We're fighting for the right of the Jewish people to exist, be Jewish, practice their religion, and be free. And one day our true leader will come and we'll be united as a whole Jewish nation so we can rebuild the Beit HaMikdash.
Bet HaMikdash, probably mispronouncing it. That's the Hebrew term for the temple, the third temple. We are doing this so we can rebuild the temple. Now you'll notice he's pulling off patches on Velcro on his IDF uniform. These are not civilian clothes. This is the uniform of the government of Israel, of its military. And he has patches on that uniform, one of which is a symbol of the temple, the third temple. So it just couldn't be clearer. Why are we doing this? To rebuild the third temple. Now, if you think we're just cherry picking this off the internet, one guy wearing an unauthorized temple patch, paid for, by the way, a uniform paid by us, armaments paid for by us, the U.S. taxpayer pays for all this stuff one way or another. The U.S. taxpayer pays for the military of Israel. Boy, does it. If you think we're being unfair and just like found one guy Well, here's a bunch of guys. It took us about 2 minutes on the internet to find this today. Here is a selection of IDF soldiers. Let's put it on the screen. There you go. And all of them have the same patch. Look familiar. Look carefully at that. What is that? That's the temple. That is the third temple. Now, we'll get to in a minute about how this might actually happen and what it would mean for the rest of the world. And just to be clear, these are conversations that most Americans, certainly me included, never wanted to have. Everybody's religious beliefs, sincere religious beliefs, when held up to the light of the rational world, to the man-made world, seem a little spooky and crazy, which is one of the reasons that in the culture some of us grew up in, we don't talk about them in public because they're personal. They're the most personal part of a person. So it is without judgment, by the way, that we're airing this, okay? Just describing it because it is significant to the future of the world, to the future of this war, and to our future as Americans. So how exactly did the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, a military that the U.S. taxpayer pays for, that lots of wealthy Americans send money to friends of the IDF, how did all these guys wind up wearing patches suggesting the point of this war was the destruction of one of the holiest places in Islam and the rebuilding of a temple that is totally anathema to Christianity? Like, how did this happen? Well, there are a lot of ways it happened. The main way it happened is because no one in the United States noticed, because it's such a secular place, and as noted, we have eyes but can't see and ears and can't hear, but this has been going on a long time in public through, in part, the efforts of a group called Chabad, Chabad. And you may know people who give money to Chabad or run into Chabad, super nice people, engaged in all kinds of charitable activities, drug rehab. There's a lot about Chabad that's really good. But what is Chabad exactly? Well, Chabad, you can look it up, is a very old organization, about 250 years old. And it's a branch of Hasidic Judaism. It's an organization that was overseen for many years by a guy called Rabbi Menachem Schneerson, who was famously in Brooklyn, considered the Messiah by some of his followers, who was a friend of presidents, or certainly someone presidents visited. He was a very powerful man in the Orthodox and the Hasidic community. And he was the overseer of Chabad, which predated him and outlasted him, but he was its most visible ambassador. And Chabad has been pushing in a pretty subtle way, unless you look carefully, for the reconstruction of the Third Temple. And it seems like, from the reading we did recently, that those patches actually came from Chabad. Well, in any case, Chabad is pushing for the building of the Third Temple. But it's not just Hasidic groups from Brooklyn, and it's not just IDF soldiers. There are, amazingly, a lot of American evangelical leaders, Christian Zionists, whose main point is rebuilding the Third Temple. Now, how could
This next thing is crazy.
an American Christian or any Christian call for the building of a temple whose inherent presence denies Christ, who said clearly, and Christians believe this, it's a core point of faith, I am the temple. You want to speak to God, you speak through me. That's Christianity. That's the whole religion right there. So if you're a Christian preacher calling for the rebuilding of the Third Temple, you kind of missed the whole point. That's more than apostasy. That's like not even knowing what the religion's about. So it's hard to believe there could be any ordained Christian leaders pushing for the rebuilding of the Third Temple. Oh, but there are a lot. There are a lot. And here's just one. This is Pastor Greg Locke. Listen to this.
The Gaza Strip, which has now been cut off by Israel, and rightly so. They should have cut them off a long time ago. I don't care how insensitive you think I am to that. There's 6 doors in this church. You can leave anytime you want to.
Fuck this piece of shit. Talking about cutting off the Gaza Strip, bro. You're just... starving people and fucking taking their land, food, and water.
They've cut them off, electricity. They've cut off their water. They should have. Now, listen, I'm not for hurting anyone that's innocent. But anybody that supports terrorism is not innocent. You understand that?
If you go to this church, just fuck off. Do not. If you go to that kind of church, just get away from me.
Israel should make the Gaza Strip a parking lot by this time next week. Destroy the whole thing. What they ought to do is evacuate up there on the hill and get a great big missile and blow that wicked Dome of the Rock plumb off of the spot where it's standing right now, so we can get that third temple rebuilt and usher in the coming of Jesus.
Boy, it is embarrassing and shameful as an American Christian to hear that and to know that video is from a few years ago. It's been on the internet. No one bothered to highlight it. Most people weren't even aware this was going on. Oh, it's definitely going on. These are very common views. Seems obvious that Mike Huckabee has them, that a lot of the Christian Zionists, John Hagee, that you think just like Israel. They just like Israel a lot. No. These are clerics, so their lives are informed by their religious views. What are their religious views? Well, you just heard it right there from Pastor Locke, who's quite a prominent Christian Zionist. He's not some lone wacko. And there he is with an Israeli flag waving behind him, casual calls for genocidal violence. Just blow it up, make it a parking lot. Well, 2 million people live there. What happens to them? They're terrorist sympathizers. That right there is the tell. This is not Christianity. Imagine Jesus saying, just kill them all. They're terrorists. Is there anything in the gospel that suggests Jesus believed that? No, there's a lot to suggest, in fact, to tell us in very clear terms. He thought the opposite, of course. But the last part, let's build the third temple and bring about the return of Jesus, is a direct contradiction of core Christian theology. And even people without theology degrees who didn't go to some eminent Bible college can tell you, what? Jesus says, I am the temple. That is not Christianity. It's not even a close facsimile of Christianity. It's clearly evil. And it is, in some sense, the driving force behind the efforts to rebuild the third temple. Julian the Apostate, who was the last guy to try it, who died invading Iran, he was not Jewish. He was a pagan, just like Pastor Locke. But for some reason, he was the instrument of trying to do this. And there are many of these people, and not just in the theological realm, in the political realm. And that's relevant to you, whether you believe in God or not, or interested in the history of the Abrahamic faiths or not. Global leaders believe this. People you wouldn't expect, and you wonder, what is going on here? It's enough to make the hair on your arms go up. Did everyone know there was an effort to rebuild the third temple and the foundation stone except me? I can't believe I was left out of this conversation. No, all of this took place in public. And if we'd been paying attention or been tuned into that frequency, the spiritual frequency, we've been spiritually sensitive enough to pay attention, we would have known this. But of course, when you grow up in a materialist culture, when the only things you believe are real are the things that can be measured or purchased on Amazon, you tend to miss a lot. And we missed this. Here's the president of Argentina, Javier Milei, who we know personally, at the Western Wall, which is believed by some to be a remnant of the Second Temple, the last stone from the Second Temple, that's the claim. Here he is there, the famous Wailing Wall, saying this. Watch the subtitles.
Hay una profecía acerca de la destrucción que relata que un zorro irrumpiría en el lugar más santo.
There's a prophecy about the destruction that says that a fox will break into the holiest of holies.
También hay otra profecía que relata que este mismo lugar será reconstruido.
There is another prophecy that says that the same place will be rebuilt.
Ahora que veo con mis propios ojos cumplirse la primera profecía,
now that I see with my own eyes the first prophecy come true,
me río de alegría y esperanza, ya que de seguro se cumplirá la segunda profecía.
I laugh in joy and full of hope, as the second prophecy will surely come true.
So a correction, that doesn't appear to be the Western Wall, and there were no subtitles. You heard him say it through his translator. I laugh and quiver with joy when I think about the Third Temple being rebuilt. Now, this is the supposedly, maybe, who knows, Catholic president of an overwhelmingly Catholic country, South American country, wonderful country, Argentina, who got elected and was presented to American news consumers as a libertarian economist who was going to fix their debt problem and get rid of inflation and just make life better for Argentines. And there he is in Jerusalem saying that he's weeping with joy, thinking about the return, the rebuilding of the Third Temple. What the hell is that? You would think that would not even be on his to-do list. If you're running a country as complex and damaged as Argentina and as promising and great as Argentina, but like there's a lot of things you got to do in Argentina if you're running it. But you take time to fly to Israel and say the thing you really want in life is the rebuilding of the Third Temple? What is going on here? And why haven't we talked about this before? Say, before we invaded Iran with troops who say out loud, we're doing this to bring about the creation of the Third Temple. Why weren't the rest of us informed? Now, here's a piece of tape you may have seen and that I personally don't want to play since I know the guy and I like him, but it does make you wonder. So this is the current Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, former Fox News employee, nice man, very nice man. 2018 in Jerusalem, and as someone who knew him well, I can tell you I had no idea that he had such evolved and specific and apparently very informed opinions on rebuilding the Third Temple, of all questions. This is not something they teach you in Sunday school in the Presbyterian Church. This is not something that people talk about at dinner in the United States. This is not something our Congress ever mentions, that the president ever talks about. This is considered so esoteric and weird and crypto-historical and religious and kind of culty and what's Chabad, and that no one ever mentions it. But here's Pete Hegseth, football player from Princeton, going on about it in a way that suggests he's thought a lot about it. This is 2018.
Today, Jennifer and I and others had a chance to go see the Western Wall of the Temple Mount, the Western Wall tunnels, so much of the old city. And as you stand there, you can't help but behold the miracle before you. And it got me thinking about another miracle that I hope all of you don't see too far away. Because 1917 was a miracle, 1948 was a miracle, 1967 was a miracle, 2017, the declaration of Jerusalem as the capital was a miracle, and there's no reason why the miracle of the reestablishment of the temple on the Temple Mount is not possible.
That's the Secretary of War appointed by Trump speaking at the King David Hotel in Jerusalem, talking about rebuilding the Third Temple.
I don't know how it would happen. You don't know how it would happen, but I know that it could happen.
What is that? That's the Secretary of War right now overseeing the war with Iran that people fighting it are starting to say actually is about rebuilding this Third Temple. It's the same man. Okay, this is the point where you begin to think maybe we should have talked about this and its implications. And what are its implications? Religious war. Global religious war. So the first heavily publicized move by the United States military and the Israeli military in this conflict was to kill the head of state of Iran, the 86-year-old Ayatollah Khomeini, who was replaced today by his son, who's apparently more anti-Western than he was. So I guess, strictly speaking, that wasn't very effective. But if you take 3 steps back, and no one did because everyone's busy denouncing him as Hitler and the most evil man in the world, and we're so grateful he's dead. When was the last time the United States military, or the Israeli, working in conjunction with the Israeli military, killed the head of a world's religion? Is that wise? It's not because we agree with all world's religions. It's not an endorsement of Shia Islam to say maybe we should pause before killing its 86-year-old leader. It is instead an acknowledgement that that might have consequences that affect the United States and Europe and the world, but particularly the United States, since we are the United States and we have children and hope to have grandchildren. And what will be the downstream effects for them when you kill a religious leader? Did killing the religious leader cripple their command and control structure? Were they unable to launch missiles and drones when we killed the 86-year-old Ayatollah? No, because he knew he was going to be killed. That's why he stayed above ground, apparently. He wanted to be martyred. Now, why would he want to be martyred? Maybe because he wanted a religious war. Why did we kill him? Maybe because we wanted a religious war. Now, why would we want that? Why would the Israelis, who got us into this war, everyone admits that now, sorry, why would they want that? Well, I don't know. Think about what would happen if this war leads to the destruction of the Dome on the Rock and the Al-Aqsa complex on Mount Moriah in Jerusalem, and we'll explain in a second how that could happen. A war that began with the killing of the head of Shia Islam. What would happen? Well, here are the numbers. There are about 15.5 million Jews in the world, total. There are about 2.5 billion Christians, and there are about 2 billion Muslims. So whatever happens next is not going to be a fight between the Muslims and the Jews, because 2 billion versus 15 million, not much of a fight. This is likely to be, if not brought under control immediately, or maybe it's too late, a war, a religious war, the one that Lindsey Graham just described, between Muslims and Christians. And it's not going to play out in the Middle East because this is a regional conflict, but as noted at the beginning, it's a global conflict where every big power has a stake in what happens. This will play out globally, and it'll play out in our cities. Islam is the fastest growing religion in the United States. There are not that many Muslims in the United States, what, 5 million or something like that? But it's the fastest growing religion. That's enough to cause problems. For sure, in Europe, 65 million Muslims, second biggest religion in every European country, fastest growing in every country. Australia, same thing, second biggest, fastest growing. New Zealand, same thing, second biggest, fastest growing. Canada, same thing. What happens in all those countries? Those Christian, Western, white countries. What happens there? If there's the religious war that Lindsey Graham and clearly the Israeli government and some in our government are hoping for, what happens? Those countries suffer more than they have suffered. And so it's possible that the real target here, it's just possible, it's throwing this out there, is not the mullahs in Iran. It's us, as it always has been. But don't take our word for it. Here's a particularly candid and honestly kind of articulate clip from a couple of years ago. This is from August of 2024 from an Israeli rabbi, Joseph Misrach, describing how Israel should take advantage of a then ongoing conflict with Iran, much less intense than the current conflict we're seeing with Iran, to destroy the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa. Watch this.
If it was up to me, the last time when they shot hundreds of missiles, I would pretend that one missile came from Iran and shoot it down. You know, then all the Arabs will go against Iran, and it will be the end of the problems. You make them fight with each other, this bunch of lunatics. Never too late. You deal with a bunch of cowards.
Shoot it down into the Dome of the Rock in Al-Aqsa. Destroy what's on what the Israelis call the Temple Mount, on the foundation stone. Destroy it and blame the Iranians. And that has the effect, as you just heard him say, of turning our enemies against each other. Turning our enemies against each other. Although they've refused to recognize it for quite some time, the Europeans are the enemies, the mortal enemies of the Israelis. That's the Israeli perspective, obviously. Look at the effects. And so if that were to happen in this conflict, It's not the Israelis who would bear the brunt of it. It's the Europeans, it's the Canadians, it's the Australians, and it's us and it's the Russians. 20% of Russia is Muslim. All of those countries would be in for serious turmoil and bloodshed, and maybe already this shortly into the war. Turn them against each other, you heard the rabbi say. Now, how could this play out? Very simple. Iran is sending drones and missiles into Israel right now, mostly into Tel Aviv. Is it beyond imagination that in the fog of war, maybe one of those missiles hits the Dome of the Rock, or we're told that it did? And of course, during war, the first thing you see is censorship, so it's very hard to know what's going on. You're already seeing it today. Is there less or more video available on the internet today than there was yesterday from this war? Well, there's much less, of course. That's called censorship. They're censoring video of what's actually happening. It happens in every conflict. Every war sets off the same cycle at home, far from the fighting. Censorship and persecution. Censorship and persecution. Persecution of the enemies, real or perceived, or the people prosecuting the war. And censorship of their views. So in that environment, when you can't really know what's going on, it's thousands of miles from here, all of a sudden, the Al-Aqsa complex is just vaporized. Oops, the Iranians did it. Then we have this debate. It's like a hospital bombing in Gaza. Who did it? Well, it was a booster from a Hamas rocket. Well, how do I know? I wasn't there. All we know is it's gone. Oh, so sorry. Could that happen? Oh, yeah, it could happen. The army is fighting with patches of the Third Temple on their arms, on their official uniforms. And what happens then? Global religious war. Talk about high stakes. You thought nukes were high stakes. At least nukes are over quickly. There are survivors. A generational religious war? That's worse than any virus and more deadly. That could happen. Do the people in charge know it could happen? Some of them do. They don't seem worried about it. They should be. We should all be worried about it, and we should all be noisy about it. No, you can't do that to the world. We hope to give to our grandchildren.
Hate to brag, but we're pretty confident this show is the most vehemently pro-dog podcast you're ever going to see. We can take or leave some people, but dogs are non-negotiable. They are the best. They really are our best.
Sure, we've never met, but I've just been watching your stuff recently, and wars tend to bring out phonies, and people are like, oh, I was on SEAL Team 27, and I know what's going, and they don't know anything. But your analysis has been...
I'm just a nerd.
Yeah, well, I have been very impressed by your grasp of what's happening. So can you just give us really quickly the overview of where we are today? What are the big developments?
Well, the big developments, as you saw with Secretary of War, I guess he's calling himself now, Hegseth, is they're transitioning the munitions. So now the claim is that it's been so successful, this air war, they don't need to use what's known as standoff weapons. So think the Tomahawk cruise missile. And they're going to now shift, the Air Force and the Israeli Air Force are going to shift now to flying large sorties of warplanes into Iran and bombing targets with what are known as gravity bombs. And these are things like the Joint Directed Attack Munitions, JDAMs. They require you to be close to the target. So the risk factor to our pilots is now increasing exponentially. But I would just like to posit a theory, and it's just a theory. I actually think the real reason we are doing this shift is not because of realities or facts on the ground that are amenable to the U.S. and Israeli strategic position. I think we are being dictated to by the depletion of our stockpiles.
Yes.
And what I mean by that, I have some numbers for your audience. We all know the Tomahawk cruise missile going back to the Clinton era, where he would just pop those things off, as soon as the Lewinsky impeachment got underway. 4,000 Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles are believed to be in the arsenal. We have been draining those since 2022, 2023 in Ukraine at a disproportionate rate. In the last 4 days of this conflict, We have expended 400 of those systems, which means that's 100 per day with the operational and tempo not ceasing. In 2026, the budget request was only for 59 new missiles. We need several hundreds every year. The reason we're getting such low numbers, Tucker, is because our defense industrial base is broken and we have no business starting a world war or a major regional war as we are in the process of doing. So I believe the real reason the U.S. and Israeli militaries are starting to get more daring and dangerous with their airstrikes is because they cannot afford to blow through the munitions that are already depleting. And it is in fact a race to depletion between us and Iran. And right now, I think the Iranians still have a very sizable, unused, increasingly sophisticated missile arsenal. Colonel Rob Manus is a friend of mine. He's a former Air Force colonel. He disagrees with me. He says, look, these missiles that are being popped off by Iran are basically a bunch of dead enders. It's going to fizzle out. And Hegseth made a sort of argument about that today, that there was a decrease. But I actually think that those dead enders, if that's what you want to call them, actually are probably still combat effective. And that is why we are now having to still continue the war, even though we have blown through these standoff munitions, which really were protecting our people. In fact, I got word from a source of mine who's monitoring this on open source, which it looks like the USS Abraham Lincoln is going to be repositioned to within anti-ship ballistic missile range of Iran. So either the U.S. really believes we've degraded the Iranian capabilities sufficiently, or we're just throwing caution to the wind because we got to get this thing over before we run out of materials. And that'll probably start happening this weekend.
This is not a surprise to people who watched carefully the few days in the run-up to this conflict, where there were uniformed servicemen. I mean, there were flag officers who apparently made this case.
Vice Admiral Kocher. Yes.
Exactly. That we just don't have the munitions to sustain any kind of real conflict. They said that, right?
Yeah, in fact, it is my understanding, and this is, again, take from this what you will, it is my understanding that last Friday the order went out at 3:38 p.m. Eastern. Before that, there was a, quote, particularly contentious meeting between General Dan Raisin Kane, who is Trump's hand-picked chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He was pulled out of retirement by Trump, so this is Trump's guy. And Kane tried to get to the word to the president that this thing is not going to go like you think it is. This is not Venezuela. This is a very different operation. And the president, for whatever reason, still decided to ignore the best military advice he got and went forward with this. In turn, Vice Admiral Fred Kocher, who was an adjutant basically to Kane, leaked parts of that meeting to, I think it was Reuters. Now, the question that I've been hearing from people is, was that Kocher acting on his own volition, or was that in fact Kocher executing some kind of informal order from Dan Kane? Because Kane is, the rest of the military is the high level is very worried about the blowback from this operation. And it is my contention that the permanent bureaucracy is desperately trying to push blame away from itself to the politicians, and even, as we're seeing Marco Rubio now, to Israel itself, which is not how a winning war would look like. There'd be no blame shifting.
So do you have any insight into how the decision was made to kill Iran's head of state / chief cleric? And this has not been a conversation anyone's been willing to have, because, of course, the proponents of it have been screaming about how he's Hitler, he's the worst person. If there's any question about whether it's a good idea to kill him, you're an Ayatollah lover, just the normal low IQ crap that you see on Fox News. But it's a real question. Like, what was the thinking there? Do you know?
So, again, this is all, background and sort of piecing the puzzle together with what I know about how it works up in that horrible city we call D.C. But basically what it sounds like is the administration used the idea of diplomatic talks to lull Khamenei into a false sense of security. We were going into a holy week at that time, and the Iranians Khamenei wanted to basically come out of his hole. And he thought, okay, we're going to get a reprieve. We'll kick this down the road until Monday, which I think was March 2nd. They got the word on Friday that, hey, we're open to negotiating. So Khamenei and his cadre let their guard down. And at the moment they did, Israeli missiles were fired at a very interesting, it was actually, if I can nerd out here for a second, the Israelis did a very interesting performance with their missile where they fired it into space from, I believe, F-16s or F-35s. It went into the space above Iran and came down at hypersonic velocities, and it came within millimeters of the known position of Khamenei. So from a tactical standpoint, yes, it was very technically impressive, but the key thing here was that the U.S. used its honor to lull the counterparty into a false sense of security using our diplomatic word that, hey, we're going to hold off and try to talk to you. And I actually think, and I say this as somebody who's a fan of Steve Witkoff, I actually think Witkoff and probably Kushner were probably in on the whole thing to basically lull the Iranian leader into a false sense of security so we could clip him. And I think, Tucker, the assumption was that if we lopped off the head of the regime, Khamenei, that the whole thing would implode like a house of cards in about 72 hours, which is why I think Trump didn't really care when Dan Kane was warning him last Friday that, hey, we've got 8 days of munitions in CENTCOM before we have to start cannibalizing INDOPACOM, and then we have a real crisis on our hands. I think Trump was thinking, we can probably do this in about 24 to 72 hours. We'll get Khamenei, the Israelis will, and then it'll all work out. It's all gonna work out. And obviously, nobody took the time to brief the president on, and I could have done it, I wrote a whole book about it, on basically what the Iranians have been doing for pretty much 47 years to harden their regime and to make it relatively survivable. And that is why now we find ourselves, what is it, day 4 or day 5 now? And they're already having to panic and change the munition structure because we're depleting them too fast. This is why, by the way, the heads of those defense companies are now being summoned to the White House because Trump is going to try to read those leaders the riot act saying you got to boost production. And they're going to say to him, sorry, we can't do it because the defense industrial base is both broken and corrupt.
I don't know the truth about what you said about the diplomacy as a cover for action lulling Khamenei into vulnerability. I have heard just the opposite, that the Israelis are telling everybody that the U.S. knew the strike was going to happen, and they're doing that to shake the faith of any of our partners in the region in our diplomacy and make us sound decisive. I don't know what the truth is.
Well, I obviously, like I said, take from this because this is all, I don't have evidence of this to present.
I don't
to
either.
You, but I find it, just if I can speculate here for a moment, I find it impossible or improbable to think, given the level of fusion between the U.S. and Israeli command and for goodness sakes, there are Israeli officers permanently stationed in the Pentagon, and I was just told by a former CIA case officer at Langley. So basically, I find it really hard to believe that the administration did not have any involvement in this. Now, they want to say that they didn't, and I think they are saying this because they're worried that there's going to be significant political and possibly legal blowback, over time, because this war is anyway. But so I don't believe that particular story when they say, oh, we had nothing to do with it. I think we probably did not have an active role in the sense of bombardment, but I do believe that we were aware of what was going to happen, and I think we probably nudged it along.
If that's true, that's one of the craziest things that's ever happened. I mean, we're trying to negotiate an end to the war we've been waging against Russia, which is right at
Are we?
Yeah, well, exactly. And the Russians aren't stupid. The Iranians aren't stupid. Not everyone other than us is stupid. And which is our assumption. They're all a bunch of savages. They're all Pashtuns, living in the Hindu Kush, but they're not, actually. They're really smart. And they look at this and like, why would we enter into negotiations with the same negotiating team that just did this? So, okay, but here's my macro question, which is, what about the safety of the United States? Like, when you kill an 86-year-old leader of a global religion, which Shia Islam is, it's the smaller but still enormous branch of Islam.
Yeah,
you're gonna expect to create religious extremism. You kill the religious leader during Ramadan. Like, was there no one in the room And I know you're not supposed to say this because it makes you like a Muslim lover or something. I just want to say this as a Jesus person, but as an American who wants peace in my own country. Nobody stood up and said like, hey, what are we doing here? Like, we're going to create a generational war that our grandkids are going to have to deal with at the shopping mall. Yeah. Did anyone say that?
No. I think General Kane was the.
And that's my problem. I'm gonna end the stream. But yeah, why are we doing this? It's the question.